Hey guys, today I'll show you a supernatural horror TV series named The Possession, Tsukisoi. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The first story, titled The Stairs, begins with a girl named Megumi, having a strong inspiration since her childhood. After graduation, she married her husband and they have a son together. On the weekends, Megumi takes her son to visit her mother, Ritsuko. While there, Ritsuko finds an old photo album from their childhood. It's filled with memories of Megumi's younger sister, Nozomi, and their precious black cat. Nozomi is absent this time, probably just because she couldn't make it, but the cat is no longer with the family. Ritsuko, while serving juice to the boy, jokingly tells him that his mother was very timid as a child, so much so that she couldn't even go to the toilet by herself, because a woman had once ended her life by jumping into a well near their house. Megumi interrupts Ritsuko mid-sentence, not wanting to scare her son, who quickly runs off. Megumi mentions how her mother was also strange when she was young, but Ritsuko seems to have completely forgotten about it. The scene then shifts back to when Megumi was 12 years old. On a stormy night, Megumi, too scared to go to the bathroom alone, asks her sister Nozomi to accompany her. When they reach the ground floor, Megumi seems to see a woman holding a child in the kitchen. However, when they turn on the light, the woman's shadow disappears, leaving only a puddle of water. Nozomi, tired and wanting to get back to bed, urges Megumi to hurry up, promising to wait for her outside the bathroom door. A moment later, Megumi hears a faint sound of a baby crying, and when she opens the door, she finds Nozomi dozing off. Unlike Megumi, Nozomi has no psychic abilities, but also hears metallic sounds coming from the second floor, along with the sound of something bouncing on the floor and the creaking of someone walking on the wooden floor. Luckily, it turns out to be just their cat. They breathe a sigh of relief, unaware that the puddle in the kitchen has somehow disappeared. The next morning at breakfast, Nozomi complains about Megumi disturbing her sleep. Their mother is upset and scolds Megumi, asking her why she didn't abide by the rule of not getting up at night. Megumi explains that she saw someone else in the house, but their mother nervously denies it. That afternoon, when their grandparents visit, Megumi asks if she can stay over at their house for the night. However, that night, the apparition follows her there. Megumi is awakened by the sound of a baby crying and is startled by the woman in front of her, but on closer inspection, it's just a piece of women's clothing. Just as she's about to go back to sleep, her mother suddenly pulls her up and drags her back home. Back home, the dripping sound of water keeps Megumi awake. She wants to ask Nozomi to accompany her to the bathroom, but she's afraid of being scolded by her mother in the morning. So, Megumi nervously descends the stairs by herself. After coming out of the bathroom, the woman who wasn't there a while ago is now standing very close to her. Megumi pretends not to see her and tiptoes upstairs, only to find a child clutching her foot. In panic, she hurries back to her room. The next day, the cat had disappeared. The mother suggested that the cat might have just gone out to play. Meanwhile, the grandparents came to visit with a monk, and they had a quiet conversation with her mother by the well. They also gave her a talisman, instructing her to place it by the staircase. Since then, the haunting incidents began to subside gradually. Curiosity piqued. Megumi did a little online research about the woman who jumped into the well. She found out that the woman had an infant, but the infant's body mysteriously vanished. Just as she was about to leave the house, she heard the dripping sound again. The talisman on the pillar, having lost its adhesive, was fluttering. Megumi, being curious, peeled off the talisman, only to find "Forgive me" written on the back, along with "I give this to you." Meanwhile, her mother and her son were staring blankly at the well. At the end of the story, the phrase "Forgive me" written on the talisman was probably penned by Megumi's mother, Ritsuko, as she was the only resident here. What she gave to the ghost woman could probably be the black cat, who never showed up again. The woman who jumped into the well was probably a mistress hoping to force her husband into divorce by threatening him with the child, but was scared off by Ritsuko. However, this doesn't explain why the ghost woman didn't try to scare Ritsuko, but rather kept bothering the child, nor does it reconcile with the composed attitude Ritsuko held in her later years. So it's also possible that this ghost woman was actually a ghost Ritsuko encountered during her childhood. The story suggests that everybody might have had some unspeakable experiences during their childhood. Since we couldn't gain understanding and sympathy from adults, these experiences became unresolved issues buried deep within our hearts. The second story, titled The Judges, takes place in a university where Megumi and her classmate Yoshito shared a close relationship. To be precise, their relationship was more than friendship, but less than romance. One summer vacation, Yoshito invited Megumi to visit his home. Yoshito and his mother lived together in an old Japanese-style villa. Although the mother was elegant and beautiful, there was always a cold aura surrounding her that kept people at a distance. She often spoke as if her son wasn't grown up yet, and when Megumi entered the house, she murmured under her breath that Megumi was absolutely not suitable for their family, yet she forced a creepy smile when facing Megumi. After Megumi entered the house, her socks were dyed red, either from a strange liquid or the color fading from her slippers. The family photos displayed in the room suggested that this was once a large family, which even included a pet dog. However, now only mother and son remained in the large villa. The mother served tea to the two young people and announced her plans to cook a traditional Japanese dish. But the dessert she served Megumi was covered in mold spots. When Megumi pointed it out, the mother quickly scooped it up and, along with her son's portion, tossed it into the trash. She then rushed back to the kitchen to apologize profusely. When Yoshito reminded his mother about the chocolate cake, the mother began rummaging through the cabinets, firmly refusing Megumi's offer to help. Suddenly, a white hand reached out from the cabinet, throwing a decorative plate onto the floor where it shattered. Megumi heard an old voice in her ears, saying that she wasn't suitable for this family. Yoshito then took Megumi to his room. As they left, Megumi noticed the mother's eyes turned strange, revealing an eerie smile. Yoshito's room was filled with modern Western musical instruments. He played a beautiful piano piece for Megumi, while the mother was in the kitchen, dealing with skinned animal carcasses. Megumi asked to go to the bathroom, and as she passed the kitchen, she felt a wave of fear. She told Yoshito she needed to leave. The mother looked displeased and accused her of wanting to leave without paying respects to their ancestors. Yoshito reluctantly took Megumi to the room where the ancestors were worshipped, then left to fetch her cleaned socks. After Yoshito left, the sounds in the room morphed into a chorus of men and women, accusing Megumi of not being worthy of Yoshito. The departed in the photo stared straight at Megumi, and a pair of hands reached out from behind. When she turned around, the faces in the photos were twisted. Megumi pulled a white cloth from the side and threw it into the air. To her shock, it landed on a hunched figure. She crumbled to escape, only to see the mother stood in the hallway with a kitchen knife, her eyes gleaming menacingly. Megumi fled from the house in great fear. Despite these incidents, Yoshito invited Megumi to meet 7 years later. By then, Yoshito had a new girlfriend, a beautiful and charming woman. Yoshito had just met the woman's parents, and due to nerves, hadn't had a chance to use the restroom. While Yoshito was away, the woman took the opportunity to ask Megumi about Yoshito's home life. Before Megumi could reveal the truth, Yoshito returned. To save face for her old classmate, Megumi simply said that Yoshito's mother was a good person. It was then that Megumi noticed that the mother had been sitting nearby, watching their conversation from the beginning. The story showed a mother had strong control issues. Yet from another perspective, she might also be a victim who had been controlled in this family. She often makes mistakes when entertaining guests, which could either be due to her lack of homemaking skills or interference from the ancestors' spirits. That's why every time she apologizes, she turns towards the worship room rather than Megumi. It's possible the ancestors don't approve of her as a daughter-in-law, but since they are stuck with her, they have to rely on her to manage the family. The title of this story refers to the mother, but it is more about the entire family behind her. It also refers to the invisible family members and husband in the mother-in-law and daughter-in-law conflict. The third story, titled Tunnel, begins with Megumi and her younger sister Nozomi moving back in together after graduating from university. One day, Nozomi headed out early for a date with her boyfriend, planning to explore a spiritual mountain. Megumi, who had never been there, advised her sister against it. Nozomi assured her that they were just going to sit in the car and look around, and it should be harmless. The trip to the mountain was arranged by Shirota, a friend of Nozomi's boyfriend Yosuke. Shirota's girlfriend Emi also joined them. The interactions and dialogues among the four were rich in detail. Yosuke referred to Nozomi as his wife, a statement Nozomi hastily denied. He said this to assert ownership of Nozomi in front of Shirota, who was likely a playboy. Emi probably sensed this, so hearing Yosuke call Nozomi his wife was a relief to her. As they got into the car, Shirota watched the two girls in the back seat with a smile, while Yosuke watched Shirota sternly, obviously noticing him eyeing his girlfriend. By the time they reached the mountain, it was already evening. Emi shared some yogurt with Nozomi in the back seat. Just as Shirota was about to suggest Emi lose weight, he noticed her glaring at him fiercely. However, Emi immediately turned back to Nozomi and chatted warmly, seemingly targeting Shirota. The atmosphere in the car was quite peculiar. There's a tunnel on the mountain where it's rumored that a curse befalls anyone who approaches a certain fenced area. One of Shirota's friends had supposedly disappeared after visiting. Nozomi, who had grown up with a keen sense of caution due to her sister, decided not to go and asked Yosuke to stay with her in the car. After the couple left, Nozomi and Yosuke sat in the back seat together, but the atmosphere was too eerie for any romance. Nozomi asked her boyfriend if Shirota's friend really had disappeared, and Yosuke explained that he'd had an accident and become vegetative, but hadn't vanished into thin air. Suddenly, Yosuke heard a girl's laughter. Nozomi, however, heard nothing. It was then that Yosuke admitted that this place felt quite creepy. Suddenly, Emi burst out of the tunnel, claiming something was chasing her and urging Yosuke to drive away immediately, flooring the gas pedal. On their way, Yosuke slammed on the brakes, stopping just in time before a cliff. Then, Emi saw a female spirit outside the car window. She covered Nozomi's mouth, and immediately afterwards, there was a banging sound on the roof of the car. The woman must have climbed onto the roof. Nozomi noticed a fork in the road and urged her boyfriend to drive on. Thus, the three of them made a hasty and awkward escape back to the city. At the apartment, Emi huddled in the blanket, continuously exclaiming how cold it was. Yosuke felt he couldn't abandon Shirota, so he decided to go back to the tunnel to find him. Nozomi stayed behind to take care of Emi, resting on the sofa. As dawn approached, Emi suddenly got up and silently walked into the kitchen, then never came out again. On the other side, Yosuke found Shirota at the entrance of the tunnel and brought him back. Once home, Shirota told them that Emi had become possessed in the tunnel. All the way there, Shirota had been shouting for the ghost to show itself and had even taken unauthorized photos of Emi with his phone. Emi seemed very upset with him and questioned whether he was cheating. She demanded that he hand over his phone for her to check. Shirota felt guilty, and during their struggle, the phone was thrown over to the other side of the cursed fence. As Shirota bent down to reach for his phone, it began to flash as if receiving a signal, and their flashlights started flickering too. When Shirota stood up, Emi was nowhere to be found. Emi's laughter echoed from all directions within the tunnel. Suddenly, Emi appeared in front of him, violently shaking her head. By the time he came to his senses, he had already been saved by Yosuke. Just then, Nozomi remembered Emi's condition when she was in their car. Later, Nozomi told her sister that Emi had gone missing. Megumi thought Emi was just being moody and intentionally not answering her phone. However, Nozomi still had the photo that Shirota had taken of Emi. As soon as Megumi saw it, she knew it wasn't just a simple case of Emi cutting off contact out of spite. It seemed Nozomi could also hear Emi's laughter, but she said nothing. In this story, Emi in the car was probably her spirit out of body. Emi might have been hidden by the ghost in the tunnel, but a part of her spirit had escaped. This part was Emi's true personality. She nearly caused a car full of people to fall off a cliff, which explains why Shirota's friend had a sudden accident and became vegetative. Back at home, Emi found that even wrapped in a blanket, she was still very cold. Gradually, she remembered the fact of her own death, and then she left. The fourth story, titled Not That One, begins with Megumi taking her first job after graduation at a funeral home, where she was tasked with cleaning the homes of the deceased. Her mentor on the first day of work was a senior colleague named Ito. Megumi was supposed to report at a prearranged time, but Ito waited impatiently, complaining about the tardiness of the new recruit. Megumi was assigned to clean the home of a deceased woman with Ito. Ito had grown accustomed to the stench and the chaotic mess of the garbage-filled house. He instructed Megumi to keep any documents related to debts and discard the rest. The deceased's body had already been removed, but the television remained on, its screen filled with static, like an echo of a life once lived. The house was filled with medicine bottles, food wrappers, and drink cartons. Judging from the adult diapers strewn on the floor, the deceased had been seriously ill, unable to leave the ground floor, even going so far as to throw the feces-covered diapers onto a cabinet. Yet the deceased had still indulged in smoking and drinking. Ito even found a condom filled with a white liquid in the house. As a seasoned veteran, Ito showed no curiosity about the deceased's life. He was just waiting to finish cleaning the house so they could clock off. Possibly due to her strong inspiration, Megumi suddenly heard a wet, sticky sound. She found a small box on a bookshelf. The moment she opened the box, she screamed and fell to the floor. Inside the box was a fleshly object covered in maggots, but all Ito saw was a dried umbilical cord. The squelching sound didn't stop. Megumi followed the sound to the bathroom. The moment she opened the door, a disgusting smell hit her. The toilet was filled with stains that were unclear whether they were blood or feces. However, in Ito's view, Megumi was just too squeamish because the toilet had clearly been cleaned. Finally, they were finishing up cleaning the deceased's room, but Megumi was particularly concerned about the deceased's bed. Ito went ahead and flipped the bedding, finding an old mother-child health handbook underneath. Inside, it was a photo of the deceased when she was young, with a toddler. Looking at this warm photo, the only item in the dilapidated apartment that had been perfectly preserved, even the stern Ito softened his attitude for a moment. That very evening, Ito brought a considerable amount of takeout food back to his home. From the furnishings, it was clear that Ito's mother had passed away. He lived alone, without a family. Despite spending his days cleaning other people's houses, his own home was in disarray. Ito didn't show up for work for 8 days following that day. Megumi, thinking of the apartment, had an ominous feeling about Ito's situation and hoped that her senior colleague would check on him. Surprisingly, her senior invited Megumi to join him. Megumi briefly showed a trace of displeasure. Ito lived on the 3rd floor. Although there was no elevator, it was still quite convenient to go up and down. After knocking on the door, a dispirited and run-down Ito appeared, his previous gruff demeanor completely gone. Megumi saw the shadow of a woman in his room, and Ito's shoulders were covered with a rash as he kept scratching his body. Megumi urged Ito to leave the unlucky room, but Ito claimed he couldn't. Then a woman with decaying skin and wriggling maggots emerged behind him, grabbing Megumi. When Megumi came to her senses, she was back in the bathroom from that day, seemingly resting her head on someone's legs. Looking closely, it was the ghostly woman. The woman first had a serene expression before she opened her mouth wide towards Megumi. In the next instant, Megumi woke up from the hallucination, finding herself still at Ito's doorstep. Afterwards, Ito continued to be absent. Megumi checked the deceased's file. The deceased woman, who died at the age of 67. She died alone in her home's bathroom. It was said that her son, who was her caregiver, abandoned her. A few days after her death, someone suspiciously like her son reported the incident, leading to the discovery of her body. At this time, Ito called to apologize to Megumi for his continuous absences, his voice slow and languid. From the other end of the phone, a wet squirming sound could be heard. Many might speculate that Ito is the son of the deceased, but this can be completely ruled out. Because the person who reported the incident was like the son, it suggests that the person did not acknowledge their identity, choosing to hide instead. This could be due to societal pressure or the potential for being charged with abandonment of a corpse. In this situation, Ito would absolutely not be involved in the cleanup of the scene. Moreover, Ito's mother died in 1992, but this episode's story likely takes place after 1992, possibly around the turn of the millennium. It can be speculated that the deceased woman and Ito are two solitary, unsupported individuals in society, drawn to each other. Rather than being like the deceased's son, Ito is more like the deceased herself. The details of their lives have a high degree of similarity. Ito is very filial, still offering the bread he bought to his mother's memorial tablet, while the deceased cherished her child greatly. The photo suggests that after the son abandoned his mother, she tried to preserve all traces of him in the house. Even the bag containing the white liquid was tightly knotted. The cigarettes and alcohol at home might have been left after the woman passed away, and she couldn't go outside to throw away the garbage. Ito missed his mother, the deceased missed her son, and Ito wasn't repulsed by the filth in the deceased's house. These two souls can be said to be birds of a feather. Therefore, in the end, the deceased followed Ito back to his home, haunting, or to be exact, accompanying him. When Megumi tried to stop this, the deceased attacked Megumi, but that also revealed her wish for Megumi to become her own child. That's why Megumi woke up in her arms. The fifth story, titled Possession, takes place in a bar where Megumi's co-worker, Satoko, is on a date with a man she fancies. Although it's only their 5th meeting, this sophisticated and easygoing man refers to it as an anniversary celebration and presents her with a bottle of red wine. The man named Nakagawa is about to invite Satoko to spend the night with him when Satoko's glamorous friend, Kanako, suddenly appears, claiming that Satoko had invited her. After a few drinks, Nakagawa still wants to invite Satoko for a second round, but Kanako pushes Satoko into a taxi and sends her off. After that night, Nakagawa doesn't contact Satoko for several days, so she turns to Megumi for help. Megumi is skilled in fortune-telling using the 4 pillars of destiny. While divining Satoko's fortune, she gets a strong sense of unease when she sees a photo of Kanako. Shortly after, the woman in the photo appears in the cafe, uninvited, and sits down, expressing a desire to hear the result of Satoko's fortune-telling session. Even though Kanako's statement is phrased as a question, Megumi doesn't have a reason to refuse her directly. Kanako simply says that Nakagawa is unreliable and advises Satoko to give up on him. The next day at lunch, Megumi tells Satoko she finds Kanako very suspicious. After all, Nakagawa disappeared after meeting with Kanako. But Satoko trusts Kanako implicitly. It turns out that back in middle school, when the introverted Satoko was isolated and bullied, Kanako came to her rescue. Moreover, Kanako has expressed an interest in getting to know Megumi and has invited her for dinner. Normally, one would stay away from such meddlesome women, but Megumi can't stand by and watch Satoko being manipulated by Kanako, and so she agrees to the visit. The path to Kanako's house is overgrown with plants, as if it hasn't been tended to for a long time. Satoko can't stop praising Kanako's cooking, but Megumi is more taken by the shadow of Kanako appearing in the upstairs window. Kanako's house is filled with books on mysticism, religious psychology, and related topics. She's also studied the same method of fortune-telling that Megumi excels in and is particularly good at face reading. As Kanako talks on and on, Megumi notices 4 photo albums in front of her, each bearing a name. One of them reads Nakagawa. She discreetly takes the album, inside of which she finds Nakagawa's shady past. It turns out Nakagawa used to be called by another name and was arrested for taking upskirt photos of high school girls at a train station. Megumi hands the album to Satoko, who instantly turns serious. Megumi then excuses herself to use the bathroom and sneaks upstairs. Satoko follows her. They find a room on the 2nd floor covered in tin foil. Nakagawa is inside, facing the wall in a form of penance, with a long self-criticism note taped to the wall. Kanako appears, showing no anger at their snooping. Instead, she boasts about how she's reformed a scumbag into a genuinely repentant state. She boldly claims that she isn't holding him captive because she didn't lock the door. Megumi wants to persuade Satoko to rescue Nakagawa, but Satoko believes that Nakagawa should stay and continue his reformation. Then, Kanako opens another room and invites Satoko to move in. Afterwards, Satoko resigns from her job using pregnancy as an excuse. Several months later, her update comes in the form of a disturbing photo of her pregnant belly posted on social media. In this story, Kanako's interactions with Satoko are always ambiguous. Megumi, as someone similarly interested in mysticism and fortune-telling, is a big threat to Kanako. Thus, a fierce competition unfolds between them. It's clear to everyone that Kanako's behavior is essentially a form of covert religious fanaticism. She manipulates others using their fears and weaknesses. This kind of psychological control isn't uncommon, controlling others under the guise of looking out for their best interests, colloquially known as pickup artist tactics. The 6th story, titled Landlady, takes place after Megumi is married and has a child. Megumi's best friend, Goto, works at a telecommunications company in Japan. Recently, due to a high rate of customer complaints, she is reprimanded by her boss. Goto deflects the blame onto her boss, saying he always gives her the difficult clients. This ultimately leads to her dismissal. Without a steady income, Goto begins to fall behind on her rent. In the face of her demanding landlady, Goto, who typically keeps a low profile at work, is equally discomfited. Additionally, in this old apartment building, garbage can only be thrown away on specific days of the week. One day, after Goto disregards the rules and throws out the trash, she receives a warning from the landlady, who dumps all her garbage at her doorstep. On this day, Goto invites Megumi over. With her husband taking their child out of town, Megumi is free to spend the night at Goto's place. Goto pours out all her grievances to Megumi. They chat loudly and cheerfully until they are interrupted by a warning knock on the wall from next door. Goto shrugs it off, saying it's a common occurrence. Midway through the visit, Megumi steps out to buy dinner and runs into the landlady, who ignores her polite inquiry about which floor she lives on. Upon returning to Goto's place, Goto tells Megumi that she is the only tenant in the building. The knocking from next door was from the already deceased landlady, but she quickly claims she was only joking. The night continues with laughter and jests. At one point, Goto steps out for an unknown reason. Suddenly, the TV in her apartment displays an unsettling, eerie scene. The moment Megumi turns off the TV, she clearly sees Goto standing inside the room, but when she turns around, she is alone. Additionally, the front door that was previously closed is now open. Megumi steps out to check the hallway but finds no sign of Goto. The door to the neighboring apartment is open. Armed with the flashlight from her phone, Megumi musters the courage to step inside. She is immediately startled by a dark shadow on the wall, but breathes a sigh of relief when she realizes it's just a shadow. However, her phone light then illuminates the frightening face of the old landlady. The landlady storms past Megumi, slams the door shut, and knocking sounds begin. Peering through the peephole, Megumi sees not a ghost, but the face of Goto. However, Goto seems transformed into a rage-filled woman, pounding on the door and cursing the landlady, telling her to stop haunting her even in death. Returning home, Goto was already sitting on the floor watching TV. Megumi looked at Goto, who seemed like a different person, and couldn't help but feel apprehensive. The next day when she left, Megumi urged Goto to move out quickly, but Goto said that the rent here was very cheap, and she wanted to continue living here. Megumi left helplessly, even though she knew Goto was living in a haunting house. When she reached the elevator, she thought about her experience from the day before and decided to leave via the stairs instead. In this story, there is a terrifying detail concerning when the landlady died. Goto kept scratching her neck, a symptom of being haunted and possessed by ghosts. The landlady never spoke again after her death, indicating that the landlady possibly died after Goto was fired, and it's likely that Goto was the one who killed her annoying landlady after she was fired from the company and struggled to pay the rent. In that way, she could live in the house free and never worry about the rent anymore. However, little did she know, the landlady she killed turned into a vengeful spirit and kept haunting and possessing her. The seventh story, titled The House on the Hill, begins with Megumi becoming pregnant with her second child. In order to improve their living conditions, she and her husband decided to move to a new house. However, the cost of the houses introduced by the real estate agent far exceeded their budget, which would necessitate taking on a mortgage. Megumi asked to see houses within their budget range. Left with no choice, the agent decided to show them the lowest-priced properties in his portfolio. As they were driving, Megumi saw a child squatting in the middle of the road and urgently called for the car to stop. However, when everyone got out of the car, they found nothing unusual. Her husband knew about Megumi's psychic powers. Although the husband was very understanding due to his gentle nature, the agent would occasionally pull a face, looking at Megumi with disdain. Upon arriving at the villa, Megumi saw the little girl appear by the house again, but when her husband came over, the child disappeared. Megumi assumed that the little girl had run away. As they entered the house, it was clear that the little girl was watching them all along. The agent told the couple that the house was cheap because it was in a remote location, but based on the condition of the house, this explanation was far from convincing. The house emanated an unpleasant spiritual pressure. Megumi, suppressing her morning sickness, looked around the house. First, she found a large number of protective amulets in a wardrobe made of raw wood. Then in the kitchen, she found a wooden board that had been removed to reveal a hole leading to the basement. Her husband saw it as a good place for storage and went in to inspect it, quickly finding another amulet. Megumi hurriedly urged him to put the amulet back. After seeing the view from the second-floor window, they immediately understood why the house was priced so low. It was directly behind a cemetery. Megumi gave her husband a look, but he still didn't understand her meaning and continued to speak optimistically. At that moment, the little girl appeared again in the cemetery. This time, Megumi confirmed that she was the only one who could see the spectral existence of the girl. She suggested that they return to the car to take a rest. As soon as they reached the first floor, the little girl appeared and lunged at Megumi. When her husband rushed down to the first floor, he found Megumi had fainted without a specific reason. They hurriedly returned home. After dinner, Megumi searched online for more information and finally learned about the dark history of the house, which the agent had desperately tried to hide. The residence had once been the site of a severe fire. The neighbors had called the fire department, which took 2 hours to put out the fire. By then, the entire house had been burned down. The current house was built on the ruins of the previous one. However, at the time of the fire, the property had been on the market and was unoccupied. Hence, there were no casualties. So why would a fire break out in an empty house? Why were there so many amulets in the house? It seemed like the spirits from the cemetery should be blamed for having brought disaster to the house. But all these are left to one's imagination. The eighth story, titled The Black Suit Man, begins with Megumi giving birth to her second child not long after. Meanwhile, her first child is still a mischievous little boy. Taking both annoying children out becomes a headache for her. One day, her husband is busy and Megumi has to take both children out to run errands. The subway is bustling with white-collar workers in suits and leather shoes, each with a grimace on their face, as if life and work had robbed them of their smiles. Amidst the crowd, a man in black stands motionlessly in the center, unnoticed by all but Megumi, who feels an ominous presence by the stairs. Just as the train arrives at the station, a weary female office worker suddenly crosses the yellow line and falls onto the tracks. Megumi quickly covers her son's eyes. In that moment, she sees a man with an unnaturally wide smile falling onto the tracks with the woman. When they return home, Megumi can't stop thinking about the man's smiling face. However, her husband says that none of the news reports mention the smiling man's presence. Shockingly, neither of them notice that the man in the suit is now standing in their living room. Several years after the subway incident, a woman named Keiko meets Megumi at a cafe for a Four Pillars of Destiny reading. Megumi mentions 2 points that strike a chord with Keiko. First, that her husband is sensitive and fragile, contrary to his appearance, and second, that she should communicate more with others when troubled. Seeing Keiko's thoughtful expression, Megumi asks what has happened. Keiko then shows a photo of her husband, and Megumi is shocked and drops her phone. The man in black in the background is the same smiling man from the subway station. Keiko explains that her husband's demeanor changed drastically after the picture was taken. Megumi reveals that she has seen this man before and requests to visit Keiko's home for further investigation. Keiko and her husband are both working and do not have children. Due to their lack of time, their house is in disarray. Megumi notes that such unclean environments are prone to accumulate negative energy. She observes that the curtains in the bedroom are drawn even during the day, creating a gloomy atmosphere. As Keiko's husband returns home and briefly greets them before changing into casual home clothes, his face remains grim, and he keeps staring at the dark bedroom. Megumi turns and sees a short-haired figure standing erect in the room, its silhouette clearly that of a man in a suit. When Megumi turns on the bedroom light, the shadow disappears into thin air. Keiko's husband then confesses that he brought the shadow of the man in black upon himself. It's revealed that one night after having drinks with a colleague, he was walking home and passed by an accident scene. He decided to take a picture with his phone and saw the man with the eerie smile. He aimed his camera at the man, but the man's figure did not appear in the photo. Since then, he has been seeing the smiling man in black from time to time. As he tells this, he buries his head in his hands in anguish. Megumi mentions that she too had seen the man in black years ago and that eye contact with him evokes a certain feeling. Before she finishes her sentence, the husband lets out a chilling laugh, then falls unconscious, collapsing onto the dining table. The next day, an exorcist performs a spirit-cleansing ritual for the three of them. After the ritual, the husband's mood significantly improves and the long-standing pressure in his heart dissipates. They agree to celebrate with beers. Meanwhile, at the subway station, a disheveled salaryman is unaware that the smiling man in black is quietly approaching from behind, indicating that the exorcism is totally in vain. The 9th story, titled The Snake, takes place at the end of the school day when a group of boys walk home together. Among them, a boy in a white uniform notices a raggedly dressed strange girl who seems to be rummaging for something in the bushes. He approaches her to see what she's up to, but his friends call him away before he gets a clear look. The little girl's name is Miko. She lives with her grandfather, but their relationship is hardly one of mutual dependence. The old man doesn't cook, and their daily meals consist of discounted ready-to-eat meals that are heated in the microwave. Their house is in complete disarray, reflecting their meager living conditions. Miko brings the heated food to her grandfather, but accidentally spills it on the floor. Her grandfather, visibly upset, cleans up the mess and throws the food in the trash. Miko picks up a piece of fried chicken and puts it in her mouth, only to be shoved to the ground by her grandfather. Throughout the incident, there's no communication between them until Miko glares at her grandfather angrily, prompting him to slap her repeatedly. At night, the grandfather falls into a deep sleep by the stove. Although his bed is unoccupied, Miko can only sleep on the floor of the storage room. She takes out a cherished photograph of her mother, allowing her dreams of a better future to mingle with her tears as she drifts off to sleep. The next morning, the grandfather tosses Miko a dirty backpack and tells her to pack her things, saying her mother is coming to get her. Miko waits in the hallway with her backpack, but it seems the grandfather has misunderstood his daughter's intentions. Miko's mother has not come to take her away, but because her new boyfriend owes money. The grandfather accuses his daughter of being an ungrateful wretch, only causing him trouble. However, the daughter retorts that her father has never treated her well. As Miko watches her mother drive away, she runs after the car in desperation. Her grandfather tells her that she can leave whenever she wants. The girl, now feeling abandoned by the whole world, silently sheds tears of helplessness and resentment. Another day after school, the four boys once again encounter Miko. She's still in the same dirty white shirt, but this time she's carrying a large stone into the yard. Through the gaps, they can see her repeatedly smashing something. After she leaves, one of the boys pushes the door open to investigate and is shocked to find a black snake on the ground, its head already pulverized. Miko's grandfather appears behind the boy, shooing the intruder away with a stern look. What comes into view next is his granddaughter's handiwork. That evening, the gas is shut off at home due to unpaid bills, making it impossible to cook instant noodles on the stove. The grandfather simply grabs one of the few remaining bottles of alcohol and takes a few swigs. Meanwhile, Miko, who is eating dry instant noodles, stares at the knives in the cabinet. A dark thought crosses her mind as flakes of skin fall around her, reminiscent of a snake shedding its skin. Later that night, she approaches her grandfather with a knife, but an odd sensation makes her hand holding the knife suddenly lose strength. The kitchen knife drops to the floor. The grandfather wakes up and sees that Miko's arm, revealed from beneath her sleeve, is covered in rashes and sores. The next day, the grandfather brings in a witch doctor to examine his granddaughter. Miko's arm and shoulder are covered in dark, scaly lesions. The witch doctor immediately recognizes the symptoms as the curse of the snake spirit that died in the yard. She warns them that if the sores on the girl's back join together, she will bring misfortune to those around her. To break the curse, the remedy is to offer a fresh egg every day for the next 30 days and recite a spell. A faint smile plays around Miko's lips as she hears this. Several years later, Miko entered her teenage years. She was no longer the scruffy little girl, but a radiant, blossoming young woman. On a rainy night, Miko invited her friend Megumi to her house for fortune-telling. She told Megumi that she might be possessed by a snake. At the moment, the heavy rain washed against the window, leaving traces that looked like snake scales. Megumi asked Miko if she had performed the ceremony as the witch doctor had suggested. The girl deflected the question, but a sly smile crossed her face. After the fortune-telling, Megumi called her husband to pick her up. Miko suggested Megumi wait inside. Megumi excused herself to use the restroom, and under Miko's watchful eyes, she opened the bathroom door to find a white snake coiled on the toilet seat. Without even looking, Miko dismissed it, saying there was no snake. When Megumi opened the door again, the snake had disappeared. After using the restroom, Megumi asked Miko if she lived with her grandfather. Miko told her she now lived alone. Just then, her husband called for directions, and Megumi stepped aside to take the call. She noticed a man in white quietly passing through the hallway behind her, leaving wet footprints in his wake. Following the trail, Megumi found an empty Japanese-style room. Miko followed her in. Megumi quickly apologized, but Miko wasn't bothered. She even told Megumi that her grandfather had hanged himself in that room due to debts from loan sharks. After the illusion vanished, Megumi asked Miko why she had the urge to kill the snake. Miko told her it wasn't to forget painful memories, but because she detested and wanted to eliminate her kind. Snakes are known for their cannibalistic nature, and she simply wanted to be the master of her own family. However, she then laughed it off and said she was just joking, telling Megumi that her husband had arrived. After Megumi left, Miko took off her top, revealing a back covered in snakeskin. Since Miko didn't perform the exorcism, Megumi decided to do it for her. This continued until the 28th day, when Megumi strangely felt the urge to peel off the eggshell and swallow the raw egg, much to the horror of her two sons who were watching. Megumi quickly reassured them. On the last night, they ran out of eggs. As Megumi returned from shopping, her husband called to say he'd taken their hungry children out for dinner. Just as she hung up the phone, she found that all the eggs she'd just bought were broken. The door was ajar and the lights seemed to be out. The broken eggs were scattered on the floor by someone, and Miko stood in the living room, her face transformed into something horrifying. She questioned Megumi for meddling in her business, then began to crawl towards her. Megumi quickly shut the living room door and fled. Thankfully, her husband and children returned just in time. A white snake slithered out from the house. Her husband quickly went inside to check, but the floor was not in disarray. Everything seemed to be just a hallucination of Megumi's. Under her family's protection, Megumi completed the 30-day ritual, which appeared to have worked. Later, Miko sent a message saying she'd successfully gotten into university. Megumi's husband beamed with joy. No matter how many terrifying experiences Megumi brought home, his optimism never wavered. He didn't think his wife's actions were wrong. He quoted a phrase, "To be alive is to be winning." In this story, even though facing a harsh living condition, Miko bravely cut off the misfortune that entwined her family, escaped the shackles of her original family, and avoided becoming a troublemaker like her mother. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.